All right, hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to start the meeting because for Regional Housing Committee, we do not have a chair today. So we're going to call the meeting to order at 2:04. And the only thing, I'll do a roll call before we do that. So for Housing Committee, we have Abby Pearsall here from Clinton. Stu Popper, I see Daniel Smith from Deep River. Andrea or Jim, are you here from East Haddam? No. From Essex, Carrie Duquesne. From Killingworth, Eric Couture. Did I miss Juliet? I don't see Juliet. From Lyme, we have David Lum. From Middletown, we have Merrick Kozakowski, sorry. From Old Lyme, Jennifer Miller. From Old Saybrook, Kathy Seglin. Sorry, I feel like I stumble over your name all the time, and I'm sorry about that. From Portland, Dan Beret. And Eric Salmon, are you here? I don't see you. I also see Mike Pelton from Portland joining us shortly. And then for Friends of the Housing Committee, we have Bill Neal here from Westbrook, Janice Atkinson from Essex, Carol Jones from Deep River, Ben Lovejoy from Department of Housing, Julia McGrath from Congressman Courtney's office, Rebecca Auger from OPM, and John Guzkowski from all the towns. And for staff, we have Susie Beckman, Eliza Lopresti, Megan Duplas, Jake Capobianco, Eric Salmon just came in, and Kevin Armstrong.
And I'd like to welcome Renee from our representative.
Sorry.
She's with us as well. I'm gonna run down the list for sorry. Wow, that was a slip. The Regional Economic Development Committee. From Chester, do we have Brian Weinstein? I didn't see him. And then Clinton, we have Sheila McKinley Bell with us. Cromwell, I saw Rodney Bitgood. Stacy Danillo from Deep River. Stacy with us? Let me see her. From Durham, do we have Debbie Husher? We might be busy with the fair. A little plug for the fair. East Haddam, Irene Haynes. Not with us. East Hampton, we don't have a member. From Essex, we have our chair, Diane Arnold. From Haddam, we have Melissa Odo. Killingworth, we have Jeff Brewer in the room. From Lyme, do we have Bailey? See Bailey. Middlefield, do we have Sean Hayes? Not here. And from Middletown, Juliet Kavanaugh. Can you see Juliet coming? No. Old Lyme, Jean Wilczynski. Is she able to join us? She said she might not. Nope, I don't see her. Old Saybrook, Jennifer Donahue. See Jennifer. From Portland, Bob Petzold. Nope. From Westbrook, Mary Wick. Where's Julia? No, Mary. From the Middlesex Chamber of Commerce, we have Rebecca Mead on the. I saw her. There she is. Thank you, Rebecca. And Old Saybrook Chamber of Commerce. Do we have Andrew? I believe so. And Ed Tessman from Connecticut State Community College, Middlesex, was not able to join us today. Leland McKenna was unable to join us today, and Ann Harrison is not. here. So I think that's, okay. Did I miss anyone? We have Julia McGrath. Did you mention Julia?
I did.
Oh, and
I
here's-
see you, Juliet.
Here's Stacy. We've got Stacy Janela from Deep River just joined.
Okay, so for housing committee folks, if I could have a motion to approve the minutes of the August 26th meeting, we can get that out of the way.
Motion.
Second, anyone?
I'll second.
And now we need to do the vote. Everyone in favor?
Aye.
Any noes? Any discussion? Okay, thank you very much.
And for REDC, we'll do our minutes from the July meeting at our next meeting, which is October 14th at 11:30. And I want to welcome Chris Cambereri from the Middlesex Chamber as well. I see you joined us. Hi, Chris.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, good.
Are we good? All right. So thank you all for joining us today. We have Dale Kroop with us, who is a very well-respected economic development professional who has worked in Connecticut for many, many years. He is giving us today an overview of brownfields. He has worked in brownfields in many circumstances. Some was to revitalize locations for housing, among other types of industries and businesses. And he has worked on a brownfield land bank and has experience with multiple grants and funding sources and pulling all the pieces together to make sure a brownfield can be revitalized and put into productive use. So with that, Dale, I don't know if you want to add anything to your background to share with us?
Well, that's quite a bit. Thank you, Susie. I'll do a little bit more embellishment, but anyway, thanks for having me. I see many people I have worked with and I work with now. I see Clinton, Deep River, Chester, Chris, hello. I see Ben, I see Portland. I don't know you, but I worked with previous first selectman there on a couple projects. But anyway, thanks for having me. I actually have been very involved in brownfields for 20 or 25 years. I've had a couple different development corporations, and as Susie said, I currently run a brownfield land bank, which I will get to. So I originally talked to Susie about this. I showed her the slides I did for South Central SCROG, which is the New Haven region of 15 towns. And, she wanted me to do something similar to that. So what I'm going to show you now and share are the slides pretty much that I did for SCROG. I also do this kind of training for LISC, Local Initiative Support Corporation, and I'm teaching a course at UConn this semester, which I'll have a section on brownfields. So brownfields has been a part of my economic development career and housing career, for that matter. So with that, you have to allow me to share. Somebody's got to empower me.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I will give you such power
Wow. Yeah.
because I am all powerful myself.
All right. Let me know when you can see this, everybody.
We can see it.
Okay. So understanding the region a little bit that I do and some of the towns more in many ways, not all the towns, but in many ways, the more suburban or rural nature. I think the brownfields in Connecticut are here. They're here to stay in that the state is very supportive of funding brownfield projects, especially for housing. I'm going to cover some things. Some things I'll go fast. Some things I'll park for a minute and talk about. This should be about a half hour-ish, a little longer. So if there's something you want me to embellish more, you can put it in the chat. I'm not looking at the chat right now, though, because I'm not good at looking at chat and talking at the same time. I don't know if it's my age or whatever. So here's, the definition basically I'm using and that we all know is from EPA. This is the slide. And by the way, I'm going to share these slides. Susie already has them. I made a couple little changes, Susie. I'll send you the revised slides. So, it's property that's contaminated or thought to be contaminated. I'm going to cover things like the release-based system that is coming up in the spring of 2026. So hang in there for a few slides. So what do they look like? These are some of my favorites through the years, the greatest hits of some of the brownfields I've worked on. I was the economic development director in Hamden for 21 years, and I got into brownfields around 2004 by forming a development corporation. So as part of a town, it was part of the workflow in my office to work on properties and put them back on the tax base, on the tax list. And because of circumstances at hand, that was a really important goal. So their buildings, their land, you've probably seen things like this, particularly on the outside. Whatever they look like on the outside, this is what they look like on the inside very often. These are machine shops, old manufacturing buildings, and these are what I call the Chernobyl pictures, the one that look really horrible. So what you typically would encounter in brownfields are building contamination, which is less regulated by the state than land contamination. You usually run into asbestos, whether it's in the roof material, the mastic, which is the which is the glue in the roof that holds it to the building, lead paint, of course, mercury that they used to put in light switches, and PCBs, which is a big issue if you're going to be dealing with an old school, let's say, because very often it's in the caulking, and that's a major cost consideration. The building abatement generally is not regulated so much by the state. It can be regulated by EPA or the state health department. Land remediation is what you're probably most familiar with. These are the dirty dirt stuff. Depending on whether you have public water or public sewer, these may become bigger issues in terms of groundwater contamination. When we get to risk management, we'll talk about how you insure things. And again, many of you know what these terms are, but I'm going to act like you don't for now, because you got a big group here. It's kind of hard to figure out who knows what. So a licensed environmental professional basically is an engineer who's licensed in the state of Connecticut, and they basically are the state of Connecticut. We typically think of regulators like DEP, or DEEP. I wish they would just change it to DEP again, because it's easier to say. But the LEP thing is very common in the Northeast. I've done some work in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, and they have something, QEP, different versions of the same thing. But basically, because of the workload and the amount of brownfields being cleaned up, the state permitted LEP to basically take their role. They still have to confer with DEEP, but they could lose their license if they do not follow the regulations. I'm going to park a little bit on site assessments for a minute because I have found through talking through chief elected officials, as Susie said, I've worked in, I think, somewhere around 57 different towns in Connecticut. And when I really talk about site assessments, I find that there's a varying degree of understanding of what they are. So I'm going to say what they are for the sake of this presentation. When you go for funding for a project, they're always going to ask for a phase one. If it's especially, even if there's a phase one that's 6 months old, they really want an update because there could have been a spill from the last time they did a phase one. A phase one is like an environmental title search. The LEP will go to the state fire marshal records, look at the DEEP records to see if there was a spill or some sort of event where there was a contamination found. Now, of course, there's PFAS, which is entered sort of the lexicon of work in this field. And so in the site assessment, basically, they're just going to identify what happened. Once they find out what happened, the phase two is basically going out and doing some basic testing. Let's say there was a manufacturing building, and very often around a loading dock or someplace like that, you will find the contamination. There could be a lagoon, there could be many different things. But the phase two really is where they dig borings and do test pits, maybe put in some groundwater monitoring wells to see what the conditions are in the groundwater. And that's where they find out what is wrong, if there's something wrong. Once they determine that something is wrong, you move to a phase three, which is really to get your arms around how deep and how wide the problem is. So the phase one is what's the problem? Phase two is how much is there really a problem? Phase three is how much is it going to cost and how much dirt or how much stuff do we have to do to that site? That's mostly about land remediation. Most buildings don't, most of the time you don't need a phase two or three with a building. You might need a phase one because around, there could be an oil tank or something like that that ruptured or provided oil to the building. So the site assessments are really important to understand because if you go for a site assessment grant through DECD in particular, you're going to need to understand the terminology. Sometimes if there's a lot of older phase 2s and 3s from consultants in the past, which is very often the case, the new consultant might come in and do a hybrid phase 2, 3 to do what they call a gap analysis. You know, what information don't we really know since they did that 10 years ago? So how long do brownfields take? A long time is the answer. But if you commit to working on brownfields, they take anywhere from 2 to 10 years. And some of the work can be done up front, and some of the work can be done with development if you have the right developers. And more, I find developers are becoming a lot more sophisticated in understanding brownfield work because they know that there's a lot of funding for it. So some of the work can be done as part of the site development and utilities. But the brownfield projects, many of the ones I showed on the screen, have taken a long time. I mean, some of these took 5 years, 7 years, but you know, it's while other things are happening. Basically, on this slide, I'll just talk about the Transfer Act. So many of you are familiar with the Transfer Act. The Transfer Act was based on the identification of what they call an establishment. This is Connecticut up until next spring of 26 is one of 2 states in the country that have a Transfer Act, and it was a major impediment for development. Really, the essence of what it meant was the previous owner was on the hook forever, even after the project would be developed and successful. And what that would mean is that a lot of people that own property would refuse to cooperate and put their properties in the marketplace. And make a very long story short, particularly on industrial properties, a lot of commercial brokers pressured the state of Connecticut to change the Transfer Act from focusing on the past to focusing on the future. So the release-based system will go into place in March of 2026 and will then sunset the Transfer Act. There's a lot of gray area there in that there are properties that are sort of in the middle of things happening. I won't get into that kind of detail because that could take an hour to explain that. But basically, the release-based system, the remediation requirements, and the liability requirements, most importantly, are going to be based on the future project and whatever the developer comes to do. So if they put permeable parking to cap a contaminated area, that developer is going to be responsible for that choice. Now, permeable parking is a very good idea, although it costs 3 times as much as putting down asphalt, but it could be a solution for groundwater attenuation when you're trying to just clean things up. We covered the phase 1, 2, 3. The RSRs, the remedial standard regulations, are about the degree of cleanup that you have to do based on the future use of the project. And I'm guessing, since this is a housing committee, that almost always you're going to have the residential RSRs, the most stringent, because people are living there. If you have childcare, of course, they're going to be residential RSRs. But if you had a warehouse, in theory, they would be less stringent cleanup requirements. So you had your phase 1 and 2 and 3, and the 3 told you had to clean up, 2,000 cubic yards of dirt, and you had some groundwater monitoring wells that had to go in, and you have a project for a 42-unit housing project. I'm just making things up. Then you're going to need a remedial action plan that the state does have to approve. The LEP prepares it, and the state does have to approve it. And this gets into whether you put your property into a voluntary cleanup program. Again, that's sort of like brownfields 201. But the wrap really is the actual plan that's going to be put into a spec and bid later on. Once you know where the utilities are going to be, you might put a parking lot over the contaminated area. You might not. You might want to take it all out. Environmental justice, I know we're not supposed to, in the world we're living in, it's touchy to use the word justice, but what you find in many communities is most of the time, brownfields were located where poor folks lived, where folks who didn't, had to live near train tracks, any kind of waterways, train tracks, any kind of transportation corridor. And so what happens is a lot of brownfields I've worked on were located in really low income neighborhoods. So there's a measure of justice that really has to, you have to consider when thinking about doing the environmental cleanup. It's not just about the project, it's about the folks that have lived there and may still live there. I'd like to mention that the workforce development piece, there's a lot of job training programs coming out, both through EDA, EPA, and the state on training people to work in the field of brownfields. When I teach for LISC, we talk about this because a lot of the students happen to be younger people who live in these neighborhoods. And what better way to make a living than to fix the neighborhood you lived in that was polluted? So you have workforce development programs, particularly in buildings, when you have asbestos removal, lead paint. Those have been around a while, but now they're moving into land remediation. Okay. So brownfield stuff can be exciting and rewarding, and although it takes a while, the housing market has certainly pressured the state to be more creative and aggressive with turning around brownfields and passing regulations that protected folks. But ultimately, organizations that do brownfields are taking a lot of risk. So I had a development corporation in Hamden called the Hamden Economic Development Corp. It does the same things as a land bank does. I'll cover land banks in a few slides, actually the next slide. But the drill is still the same. When a board member joined my board, I told them, thank you for being on my board. And if you're in a town, this really applies, and many of you are from towns, you are taking a risk because anybody who gives direction, who is involved directly in remediation, making decisions, you're personally liable. You can't get around it. And there are many ways to reduce the liability of being involved in it. Insurance, I'll talk about in a minute, but there's personal liability that comes with it. You walk on a site, you fall down. Covenants not to sue come from usually the government, either from the state DEEP or EPA, depending on the funding source. They're usually readily available, that they're not going to come after the developer, whether the developer's a nonprofit or for profit. You can get the covenants not to sue. All of this is to protect the folks involved. Indemnifications, I find, are between parties. So if you have a contractor working for you cleaning up, you want them to indemnify you if they mess it up, and they want you to indemnify them if you make a bad decision. So indemnifications are between parties. Covenants come from the government. That's the oversimplification of it. And you usually need a combination of all these things to have a good risk management plan. When I work in a town, I'm working in about 5 different towns now doing brownfield work, and I bring up this topic, and it really will make your eyes cross. And it's not the most exciting topic, but it's probably the most important topic. Why do I have lawyers on there? If you remember nothing else that I said today, I want you to know that you should never use a real estate attorney. And I'm sorry, are there any attorneys on this call, Susie?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay, good. And with all due respect to lawyers, never use anything but an environmental attorney on a brownfield. Attorneys by nature, of course, are risk averse. They're taking care of their clients. That's a good thing. But environmental attorneys don't say, you can't do this, or you better not do this. They say, here's how you do it, but here's the risk. And there are many environmental attorneys that are of very high quality. I generally work with 2 or 3 that I'm comfortable with. It sort of depends if it's a Transfer Act site or just a building. I've had real estate attorneys kill projects because they're just looking at the financeability of a project. They're not looking at how do you solve a problem. So lawyers are important if you have the right one. The pollution liability issue, the insurance, is really important. So when I was in Hamden, I had this project here, the one with the building here in the lower right, and in the upper left is the inside of that building. And that property was a mess, besides being polluted. It was a 16,000 square foot building, and we're going to do a couple case studies, by the way, in a few slides. It was a 16,000 square foot former plating. Whenever you hear plating, you know you're going to have some challenges. In that case, the building was polluted, groundwater contamination. It was located in two different towns. The New Haven boundary went through the middle of the building. The zoning was different on both sides. Taxes were owed. The owner was dead. There were 7 mortgages, like bank mortgages, and like 4 of them were from banks that were no longer in existence. And it was a mess on the title and a mess inside. So what we really needed to do, so our development corporation got grants to clean it up. And we also found a future developer, which was simply a construction company. And it's not in a great neighborhood, and it's not a great building on a good day. But it was also in a residential neighborhood with low-income folks in it, and it was, scary. So what we ended up doing was getting a pollution liability policy for our corporation to protect our owners, because this was a several-year cleanup. And what we also found in doing these pollution liability policies, that they could be assigned to a future owner. So when we found the construction company to take it over, they were just going to rehab it once we cleaned it up environmentally and the title. This pollution liability policy protected from contamination that was on the site and during the time that they rehabbed the building. And this pollution liability policy was a 5-year policy. I think we had it for about 1.5 years, and we transferred it over to the new owner. And I have found that these policies are really good for making people feel comfortable about, especially doing housing projects. And again, many of the housing developers have gotten a lot more sophisticated now about understanding these liability policies, but they cost money. They cost between 50 and 100 grand to have a policy. So if you have a big project, you really need to think about that in a budget. General liability is more like, fall down and hurt yourself insurance. But if you are on a nonprofit board or you're in a town, you could meet and talk about the project. That's one form of liability. But if you start setting foot out there, that increases your liability of your board members, whether it's a town or a nonprofit. So you just have to pay for these things. The good news is that both EPA and DECD will pay for the insurance as part of the grant. So when I put together a grant, I'm just finishing one up in Bristol. There was a $65,000 5-year policy, and the new owner had about 3 years of that 5 years. And my general liability insurance went up because the risk was more. It's usually based on the amount of cleanup. So you just have to budget for it and plan for it. I'm going to skip the land bank for a second. Security is a big issue. Buildings that are boarded up attract all kinds of uses that you don't want on that site. That also attracts uses that create liability. So if you're going to think about taking title to a building, you need to think about funding the security of that building. In my project in Bristol, which is about 95% done now, we did put a big fence around it. Wasn't enough. People cut through the fence in the winter, of course, if they needed a place to get out of the elements. They broke windows and got in there. But you just have to plan for it and deal with it. When you come to brownfields, most of the time there are tax issues, although there is a sort of subclass of owners that are very shrewd. They pay their taxes, even though there's no value to the property, because they don't want somebody to take it away in a foreclosure. And again, everything I'm talking to you about, I've been through the details of how you do it. And if you have follow-up questions, I'm happy to talk to you. In your phase 2, you're probably going to put a monitoring well in to see what the conditions are of groundwater and the dirt and any other subsurface things. Those you have to budget and plan for having monitoring wells based on the remedial action plan, the RAP, based on whatever the state, the LEP and the state tell you to do. Some of that is negotiable. I did a big park where they wanted 30 years of monitoring. I'm like, we're not going to even be alive in 30 years. What are you talking? Who's going to keep track of that? So we ended up at 10 years. And but you have to fund it. You have to find a way to have somebody pay for it. Some people like to. This is getting into the weeds a bit, but when you have monitoring wells, you can actually put them in their own LLC. They call it single purpose LLC. You can insure that or have a bond posted to pay for future cleanup. And the last thing I'll say about insurance is you can actually pay for, one of the common concerns is, what if it costs more than we have money for? Who's going to pay for that? That's a very common question that I get. And you can actually insure that. They call it cap cost insurance, but it's incredibly expensive. So if my pollution liability insurance was $50,000, it's probably $125,000 if you want cap cost. But if you have a really complicated site, it is something to think about. If you have a project that's extremely expensive, it's just another cost in the overhead. So don't be frightened by it, but these are things you really need to think about. The risk management side, if you're doing it by a town or a nonprofit, especially a nonprofit housing developer that may not have done a lot with more sophisticated cleanups, or maybe used to buildings that just had asbestos and lead. These are things to really think about. So as Susie said, I run the New Colony Development Corporation Land Bank, and I used to run the Hamden Economic Development Corporation. They really kind of did the same things. The land bank concept actually came out of Atlanta, Georgia through the EPA, and Connecticut sort of embraced it about 15 years ago. I got involved in it when I knew I was going to be retiring from my town job, and I wanted to think about a bigger footprint statewide. So you have to be certified as a land bank in Connecticut. DECD certifies you. There are 3 land banks in Connecticut that are certified to work statewide. There's NVCOG, which is out of the Valley and Waterbury area. Technically, they can work, but they generally stay on the west side of the state. There's my development corporation. I'm working on 2 active, soon to be 3 active projects. I'll get to what we do in a second. And then there's the Northeast Land Bank. Northeast, I forget what they're called exactly. I'm actually a consultant to them now. I told Susie this the other day, that where they want to build their capacity. I'm not in it for the long haul with them. They just need somebody to help them get some basic funding and get their board developed. So they're going to be a factor maybe a year from now, but they are technically in place. There are other land banks throughout the state of Connecticut. Hartford has a land bank, New Haven has a land bank, but not all of them are certified brownfield land banks. You could be a land bank just to hold property, but if you want brownfield funding, it's not that hard. It's like forming a nonprofit, basically. So it is a catalyst for developing partnerships. Private developers, again, are just starting to really cotton on to why a land bank is helpful. We do the dirty work before the developer gets there. So in the case of Bristol, this is an old factory, which I'll probably show a slide for in a bit, which was owned by 2 brothers, $1 million in taxes, a whole bunch of old mortgages, and $2 million of cleanup. We basically foreclosed out everybody on the title. So the title was clean, no encumbrances, and there's an art to that. We actually then got a $2 million remediation grant, which we're just finishing now. Just a little bit of remediation we're doing around a telephone pole right now. And the city is negotiating with the developer to build 100% affordable, 50 to 80% of median housing in this. It's a great building, but it was a cleanup. It was a Transfer Act site, and we had to go through all of the steps, which would take 5 more slides. I don't want to kill you with that. So why a land bank is important? Because you get priority funding. DECD likes land banks. They think it's a useful thing. So my development corporation success in Hamden was based on my relationship with these funders and all the years we went for Urban Act funding and other programs. But when I got to the land bank part, I was able to leverage a lot more funding for brownfield cleanup and be the middle, the catalyst entity that would work with the developer. And so the developers like it, because we're taking out we're clearing title for them. They don't have to go through foreclosures. We are cleaning most of the time, cleaning all of the contamination. But they like that because they like to invest their money in the actual project, not something that's negative. Most of the time, these properties are acquired for $1. The attraction of a land bank is that it reduces the liability of the municipality. So when I had my development corporation, or in the case of Bristol, I foreclosed, my organization foreclosed on all these properties. So the taxpayers in that given town were not responsible in any way. Sometimes there had to be tax liens that were given to us by the municipality, but the municipality was never liable for the environmental cleanup. So in many cases, in the case of Bristol, they gave us $1 million of tax liens for $1 because they were never going to get that money. And there's varying degrees of this. And what they do, we acquire property, we clean them up, as I said, we negotiate, we certainly communicate with the community, either the stakeholders or the nonprofit or the mayor or first select person. We coordinate with DEEP and EPA. We are present at all the conferences. We are with them all the time, in their training. We apply for grants on our own, and we manage the remediation process and things like prevailing wage. All of the usual accoutrements that come with a grant, the requirements, the bidding requirements, and we deal with CHRO, we deal with the Department of Labor, we deal with sometimes the labor unions, but we mostly manage the LEP and the contractors that are out there doing the work. In my prior life, I worked for a civil engineering company before Hamden for almost 14 years, and I learned all about how to manage construction. So I came to this very naturally from my previous work. So that's what a land bank is. That might be of interest to you because again, it takes away your own liability and helps you to focus on what's important, the project. So when you get the slides from Susie, here's a slide that has links to a lot of things. There's many more links to things that you can look at. I just wanted to mention a couple things from the slide. DEEP, of course, has the voluntary remediation program. They have many different programs where you register a project so you can get your covenant not to sue. DECD is extremely active in funding brownfields. They went from 3 to 2 rounds of funding per year, but they're very generous. And I have to give Governor Lamont kudos for really committing to funding all kinds of cleanup. They just raised the limits to $6 million for cleanups. And just so you know, for those of you who are interested in economic development or even housing development, the ratio of private investment to $1 of brownfield money is 12 to 1. $12 of investment, whether it's housing or commercial development, for every dollar of brownfield money. That's an incredible investment ratio. And that number goes up. It was just 8 to 1 a couple of years ago. It's gone up a lot because, like I said, developers are really very active in the brownfield world because of the lack of property and real estate in Connecticut. I like to mention HUD because a lot of you might be eligible for small cities money through CDBG, through DOH. It's kind of a pain in the neck to deal with that program, but it is there. Any house that's built before 1977 has lead paint. You may not think it does, but it does in some layer below the 5 layers of paint that are on there. And of course, people typically think of friable paint on windowsills and things like that, and that's certainly an important thing. But that is a resource for funding. The last one I want to mention is the first one. Since the new federal administration this has been on hiatus, but this will come back. So a lot of times, a lot of you look at a site and you say, what can we do with it? We'd like to get a market study. We'd like to do a cost benefit analysis of the different options that could be on that site. And the federal EPA has a program called the Remediation Land Revitalization Program that provides grants through Region 1, which is in Boston. And there's a link to that. You'll get on this when you get the slides. And I've done about 20 different projects, everything from, Claremont, New Hampshire, town of 11,000 people, to Bethlehem, New Hampshire, to Lincoln, Maine, to some sites in Connecticut. And you can do all of those things. You can do a market analysis, zoning analysis. You still have to have an environmental piece of it, like you have to do at least a phase 1. So that's a great program. Right now, it's kind of on hiatus, but I do know it's going to come back at some point next year. DECD also has something called a BAR grant. You may have heard of this. They have their usual cleanup grants and their assessment grants, but they also have a BAR grant, which I'm working on 2 of those right now. These are to, again, do a market analysis, a phase 1, you might need a phase 2, find out what's the best use on that site, do a stakeholder involvement type of process, So both the EPA and the bar grants are really useful tools and might be a good first step for you all to think about DECD. You do the bar grant first, then you do the assessment grant, because you kind of know which direction you're going, and then you go for the remediation. The bar grant max is 200,000. The assessment grant is 200,000 through DECD, and like I said, the remediation was just increased to 6 million. And the EPA varies based on what the regulations say. I can't give you a number on that. So that is a bunch of information about funding. I also think that DEEP has some kind of ecological. I'm working on a project in the northeast part of the state, way up in the northeast. It's going to be a land bank project, and there's a big ecological thing because they have GB groundwater that needs to be dealt with in the remediation plan, and there's going to be some deep grant programs that are going to be also added into sort of the alphabet soup of all these funding things. So just to give you just a few, let me take a breath here. Before I get to a few case studies, any questions or comments so far? Keep going. I can only see like 6 heads, so.
I don't see any
Yeah.
indications of hands.
Well,
Keep
there is one,
going.
there
Oh,
is
go
one
ahead.
thing I'd like to point out. This is David Lum. I'm pretty sure the environmental insurance is a claims made policy, which is important, versus your general liability, which is an occurrence-based policy.
Correct. That is
And
correct.
that has great meaning if you don't follow the rules on that.
That's why it's important to have a good risk management plan. And as I said about not using a regular lawyer for pollution, it's the same thing with insurance.
That's odd. I am a regular lawyer.
And you know this, and you know this. I'm
I
just
didn't realize.
but there are experts that focus, like I have 2 insurance agents, one for my board, comp, general liability, errors and emissions, Fidelity for handling all the funds that we handle. And then I have one that just does the environmental insurance, because they really kind of know the marketplace, and the marketplace has shrunk quite a bit over the last 10 years. There used to be a lot more people in the game. All right, let me hit a few case studies. So Goodrich Street, which is the one I kind of talked about already. These are just, what happened. This was the one that had about 1 million different variables with the mortgages and the property line going through the middle of the building. It did look like Chernobyl. It's now a construction management company. The upper left picture, the exact room that is that office. So you can really do things. This project took about 7 years of 5 years, excuse me, just on the remediation side, and then they took another couple years to go through zoning and get their financing, and it ended up being, this is lemonade out of lemons in this case. You do find that there are residential neighborhoods. This is actually a famous one statewide. Some of you may or may not have heard of this neighborhood in Hamden, where the entire neighborhood was built on a landfill. You find this more in urban areas, everything from parks to schools. And this is that house that says 45 I went in that house, and it looked just as bad as it looks in this picture. And 2 people were living in there, older woman and a boarder, believe it or not. It was like 800 square feet. But what happens here, the whole neighborhood was built. This was subject to a consent order, and this entire neighborhood was part of the consent order. There was $100 million invested for fields and home remediation, structural repairs. It's a long story. And we did 2 parks that were really hideous. In the lower right was with that drone. That's an amazing drone picture, but that's what it came out to be. And it ended up being that the baseball field that there was became a Division III college baseball field with Albertus Magnus. And so, that also, when you get into urban parks and things like that, or you're going to remediate a park, again, whether you have public water or sewer, in this case, we had to upgrade the storm drainage in the neighborhood. So that baseball field was 3 feet higher than it was before. And we had to improve the storm drainage out to the west of that site, and that whole thing cost about $12 million. This is my sort of epic project. I worked on this for 10 years. This had every funding source ever in it. It was done by the Development Corporation, could have just as easily been done by the Land Bank. This one had pollution liability insurance. It had EDA funding from the Department of Commerce, EPA funding through the revolving loan program, DECD of a number of grants, and it had historic tax credits, which had to be bridged with a loan from the Guilford Savings Bank. And by the way, a kind of a funny anecdotal story about Goodrich Street. I was in a planning stage, which was a critical part where I needed assessment dollars to figure out what we were going to do with it. And the maximum you could apply for was 200,000 for for an assessment grant through EPA. And the guy at EPA told me, well, if there's 2 addresses, you can apply for 2 grants. So he wouldn't have told us that unless he trusted that we could get the job done. And there's an old saying in retail, before you make a sale, make a friend. And I spent a lot of time with this guy, getting to know him, and he wouldn't have offered that. And that was a big reason why that went forward. But on the incubator, this is a low-income neighborhood, probably the lowest income area of Hamden. Very close to a very tough area in New Haven. You see, I think that's Sleeping Giant in the background. But anyway, this was an old school. It was a mess. It had all these funding sources and a plethora of problems. I'm going to show you a video. This is 2 minutes long, 3 minutes long. It shows you the evolution of the site. Just bear with me. This was time lapse over time. Yes, it looked like that. Disgusting. Great firm. So I like to show that because if you're dealing with schools in small towns, very often there's that school that you needed to abandon and you needed to build a new school. Very often schools can be really difficult to deal with. They have lots of problems. This was pretty severe though. And it had a lot of different funding. This was a hard project. I finished it, it was 10 years. I finished it in 2019, right before COVID. And to make a very long story short, we ended up selling it to another incubator organization who's done a great job and even way beyond what I ever dreamed it would be. But it's in a residential neighborhood. It's not near 12 restaurants, you know, kind of a cool co-work space. But it is a business incubator, entrepreneur center in the middle of a residential neighborhood. Last one. This is Bristol. This is an older picture. It's a 95,000 square foot building. DECD's been involved in it. The land bank owned it. We remediated it. We transferred it back to the city, who's right now in the final stages of working with the developer to build. I think it's going to be, I believe, 83 units of 50 to 80% of median income housing. And it, you know, in the basement, it looks like all the other ones from the picture. And that is it. So that's a mouthful. So, you know, brownfields is worthwhile to get into, and there's money. There definitely is money. The last thing I'll say is when the Transfer Act, given all the types of towns on this call, the Transfer Act sunsets in 2026. And a lot of us feel that a lot of older property owners who had that, you know, that kind of agricultural property or an old building they used to do stuff in, they're going to come out of the woodwork because they know they're not going to have that kind of liability they used to have. So you're going to see more people bringing brownfields to your towns for available redevelopment. They may not all be worth doing, but you're going to definitely see a lot more. So Susie, that's basically it. I don't know if you have a Q&A or that, you know, what you'd like to do next.
Yeah, we could certainly open it to Q&A. Are there any questions? In the room?
Is there a list of brownfield properties in Middlesex County?
That's a great question.
There is, but it's probably not up to date. So if you go to the DEEP website, they have a list of every town was considered, but they're definitely not up to date. My advice to you on there is to, if you know of an LEP in your area, because there's dozens of really good LEPs around Connecticut, that's the better source. The other thing I would tell you to think about is that UConn has a program called TAB, Technical Assistance Program. And they will come and do, I had them come do one when I was in Hamden, and I recommended them many times. They do a great job. They have students to do the research for you in your town. You have to get in their queue because they're in an academic, you know, system. So if you don't have it, Susie, I can get you the contact person for that, but you can show people. They'll do an inventory for you. That's probably a better bet than just looking on the state website will give you some idea.
Yeah, there is a state website. We did have a list created. Margot Burns, our environmental planner, had one created for Rivercog, but seems to me it's very incomplete because as I've been talking to other towns that have some listings on there, there are even more that the towns are familiar with. So what we would like to do as Rivercog is contact all the towns. Maybe we work with UConn TAB to do this and with our own internal sources and create a really comprehensive list of those properties known by the towns. And then we can map them and then move forward maybe with assessments for some of them.
In the rural towns like Chester, Killingworth, Adam, there's a lot of small places that are hidden in the woods. And wow, I mean, one of the things you can do is just go to take a look at DEEP's assessment of the various ponds and lakes and how much fish they can eat out of them on a monthly basis. And you can find your old ones like Chestertown dump next to Cedar Lake. So.
Yeah.
The other thing you could do, the other thing to do, I mean, you know, there's probably, it's like a lot of, when you're doing genealogy, right? You kind of look at, you look at the history, what's available to you, then you talk to people. And I think when you talk to your DPW folks, your highway folks, your, town engineer, just talk to your people locally. They probably know of things that they just know about by osmosis. They clean, they plowed a road, and they know of a building somewhere. And then some of the manufacturers organizations know stuff too.
A lot of times they won't tell you though. Groton, for example, they got posted in the planning department. It says, we have a list of transfer act properties, but I could never get it from.
I think when the transfer act goes away, that's what I'm saying. You're gonna see a lot more information come out.
Yeah.
So I think we had a couple more questions. Renee
Yeah.
had a question?
I have a couple questions. Let me see.
What town are
So
you from? What town are you from? Just so I know.
I'm the state representative for the 36th district, which is Chester, Deep River, Essex, and Haddam.
Okay, good. Okay.
So these projects, can they be done for things other than housing? Like,
Of course.
can you remediate a brownfield and turn it into a park or something else?
Well, it depends on the agency you're going to. So if you're going to DECD, they want
Mhm.
economic and community development. They're probably not gonna do a park. But
Mhm.
EPA will do a park. So you have to get in the queue for EPA funds. They come out once a year. I think it comes out like in October for a December submittal. You can certainly get EPA assessment dollars. So it depends on the use, but I would say DECD no for parks, EPA yes for parks. And sometimes, as I said before, DEEP might participate, especially if it's near a waterway and there's an ecological issue there. DEEP has programs that people forget about as well.
Okay. And if there's a brownfield that you're gonna pursue, and there's not town water or sewer that connects to that property, do these grants include putting in like a high capacity well and septic, or do they include money to then extend that water and sewer down there? Can that be part of the project? Or is that something separate that you'd have to find funding for that?
There's a great question. It's a little bit of gray area. So when you apply for brownfield funding, it's almost like a grading curve. Projects come in, they're in various degrees of design. There might be a developer that's been procured and established as a preferred developer. I find unless a developer is really identified and clearly in the picture, you're not going to get funding for non-brownfield related things, like you said. But if a developer is in the picture and there's private investment as part of the project, you probably could get some of what you're talking about done. It depends on the level of, now, when a developer is involved, you've now triggered more prevailing wage. Since you're in the legislature, you probably hear about this, the whole prevailing wage issue, I'm sure, ad nauseum.
Hit me with that now, huh?
But it's somewhat, it's somewhat more resolved now than it was even a year ago. But once the private sector gets involved, now you're raising some of their costs because, if you give them money for brownfields, their project is subject to prevailing wage still, and therefore their costs go up.
I was thinking about it. So let's say hypothetically, you have the property, you're gonna remediate it and you're gonna put condos there. But the town water and septic doesn't go down there. So like what I'm trying to figure out, is that a separate project? Because by bringing water and septic down there, you may benefit other residents, not just the new project that you're building. So maybe the people across the street now can get town water, town septic. So, and it
Right.
benefits the town and the taxpayers. So is there like a Venn diagram that?
Well, I think what I'm saying is, I think it's possible depending on the ultimate goal, right? So if you're removing a polluted well and replacing it with a new well, that sets the stage for what you're talking about, or a new way of getting water to, I think it's not impossible. It's just, it's just different. If the product is mature and the thinking behind it is mature, I think there is a possibility of doing that. And the other thing I have to mention here is PFAS. You know, because when you get into areas where there's wells, you have to evaluate. For those of you who don't know PFAS, please Google it. But PFAS is a relatively new thing that DECD and DEEP looks for, and very often they're found in wells. So if you're resolving, to answer your question a little bit more, if you're resolving a PFAS situation where it's in the wells of those homes, there may be some willingness to go beyond just taking it, cleaning it up. It depends on what you're doing in the future.
Okay, so then just a couple quick questions. So, are there implications if the building is historic? So again, on this hypothetical situation, there's land, it's brownfield, but there's an old factory there, and the factories, are there implications if that building is somehow historic?
Usually with positive implication. So I have been through this 2 or 3 times with the historic building. So how historic buildings affect how you think about a brownfields depends on if you're going to ask for historic tax credits as part of the project itself, whether it's residential or not residential, it doesn't matter. So in the case of Bristol, the developer has been talking to SHPO, which is part of DECD, by the way, they're just under the same roof, about historic tax credits, which I'm going to get back to in a second. And to be eligible for even consideration for tax credits, they want to control how you sandblast off lead paint, for example. So the means and methods of remediation, you have to think about if you think there's going to be historic funding, even just a grant for historic funding, never mind tax credit. In the case of the incubator project where I showed you the video, same thing. But the good news is for historic tax credits, are you, your region Eversource for power?
Yes.
So Eversource buys historic tax credits in the hundreds of millions of dollars per year in Connecticut. So in the case of the incubator project, our corporation was able to secure $1.8 million, which represented about 25% of the total development cost of that incubator, because we followed more rules and spent more money on certain things like windows. So the answer is could be a positive net gain with historic buildings if you're willing to go the extra mile. So the windows that we picked for the incubator, I probably spent 200 grand more on those windows than I needed to. But guess what? That turned into 1.8 later on. And then there's a lot of different issues if you want to do a reuse of the space. And because old schools, for example, if it's a school, which is very common in these situations, when they built old schools in the 30s and 40s, for example, the hallways were enormous. They were really, really wide. So it took away from the net square feet in the net development. I'm getting into the weeds, I realize. But what happens is SHPO doesn't like you to change spaces. They don't want you to build walls within walls sometimes. It depends on the building and the architecture and the architect and the history. What I'm saying is it's a great opportunity if you think ahead. So we did a lot of planning on the incubator. She didn't want any sheetrock on the brick wall, interior walls. And I'm like, well, then you don't have a project. You have to heat the building. I mean, you can't just have open brick, So we negotiated an agreement, and then the building became eligible for 25. That was a $1.8 million gain by really thinking ahead. So I think what you do is you really step back and say, okay, how could this be an asset? The thing with Bristol was the lead paint, blasting the lead paint. The contractor did not want to do it. I'm like, dude, you're doing it. You're going to do what she says. She's giving you the money. You do whatever she says.
Okay, all right, good. And then what about, and this might just be based on your experience, but what about public opposition? So again, back to my hypothetical building or my hypothetical piece of land that's got an old factory on it that we want to turn into housing or something. And there's public opposition, or there's even opposition, or there's some pushback from, say, local government officials. How do you deal with that? Do these projects, because I know I've talked to some developers and they're like, look, if anybody's going to sue me, I'm out. Like, I'm not even gonna, if the neighbors don't like this, find somebody else. And
Well,
so
they
they don't
want
wanna get into that, they don't wanna go have somebody sue them because, their view of a tree is blocked or they can't see the river anymore or,
Yeah.
what's your experience with that?
Well, there are NIMBYs and there are NIMBYs. There are some that are, no matter what, if you tell them the sky is purple, they're gonna say the sky is yet red. I mean, there's nothing you can do about some people. I find the best way to deal with it is I just provide lots of information. I let them air their views. I share information from the state. I bring state people down to talk to them at these meetings. When I've done when I did the Goodrich Street project, I had State Deep and DECD at all the public meetings, so they saw a regulator there. And then we also have the LEP explain details. Now, if they're going to be against it, no matter what, there's nothing you can do
Yeah,
about that.
I mean, I guess, let me just clarify my question. So I understand all that and I think that's great. But then you get to the point where somebody files a lawsuit. So
What are they suing? But what are they suing for?
what does litigation do for these projects? Does
Well,
it
okay,
stall
I got
it?
you.
Can you keep going forward?
Litigation will stop a project, but what are they suing for?
Well, that's the problem, they sue for all, I mean, I'm thinking of one project in a town that I represent and, the neighbors are, I haven't read the legal documents, but basically they just don't want the project in their neighborhood because, so they're suing, right? They've sued the developer that it's not a good project, that there's not enough parking, that it's too high, that it doesn't fit the character of the town. And, I'm not a civil housing law expert, so I don't know how, I know they lost the first round, and now they're appealing. But
Yeah,
like.
usually, these are usually through
General, what
zoning.
happens
Right,
is
it's usually
that,
through litigation. When you apply for brownfield funding, they'll say, is there litigation? And the answer would be yes in this case, if there was a lawsuit. But most litigation is based on zoning law. And so if the developer has any kind of real experience, they could always come in under the 830G and it's up to the zoning board to say no. They could sue all day long, but it has to be based on some law, some statute, some violation. Maybe the public notice wasn't properly done,
well, yeah, it's like parking and height and all that kind of stuff. And, just as a comment, as a legislator, I get the whole 830G thing and I know, we have a housing crisis and we had a housing bill that got vetoed and we're trying to negotiate with the governor, but, I support 830G, but I don't support it as just a way to backdoor around something.
Yeah, I get you. But
There is housing, we need housing other than just 830G housing, right? So, with that said, so then my last question is, if you could just talk about that ratio again, that 12-1, can you explain that again?
right. So if you're putting a project, you're remediating a project that would be available to a developer for housing or other use, but very often it's housing these days. The state numbers this is based on the investment numbers that the state has put together. DECD has put this together. There's a ratio of $12 of private investment for every dollar of brownfields. I don't know if that includes the architect, because if you got a $10 million project, you probably have, almost $1 million in architectural engineering type costs. But yeah, that's the number they use. I used to say 8-1 and they kept correcting me. No, it's 9-1, 10-1. Now it's 12-1.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I guess I'll say that, shameless self-promotion here, if anybody's interested in talking further about the land bank or consulting on a project, obviously, I would love to hear from you. I know some of you already. I know see from the list of people on here that I worked with some of you in your towns before.
And then I saw.
Could you repeat what you said about the available grants? You went through like a bar grant, an assessment grant, and a remediation, and you said what the maximum amount of those grants could be. Could you repeat that, please?
Sure. So if you're talking about DECD, They have 2 rounds per year. They just announced about 2 or 3 weeks ago, the last round. The next round will probably be January or March or something like, January comes out for a March submittal, and they'll make the awards in May. And you can apply for essentially 3 or 4 different categories through DECD. There is a BAR grant, which is sort of a hybrid planning and assessment grant. I'm dealing with, let's say, it's not in your region, but I'm helping the town of Woodbridge because they acquired an old golf course. So they got a BAR grant, and the golf course is, failed twice in referendum. Everybody, there's a big NIMBY group there. And what they got the BAR grant for was to hire some designers and to do a phase 1, and if necessary, a phase 2. Then phase 2 wasn't necessary, but they budgeted for it. They applied for, I think, 150,000. They're doing a market analysis for the need for housing. They're doing a cost benefit analysis. So if they put housing here, here's what the revenue versus the cost. If they're doing open space. So in their case, to sort of go back to the previous question about parks, they're looking at the possible reuses of that golf course. It's 153 acres for several different things. So they're using this BAR grant to evaluate the impact on the taxpayers and the revenue, let's say, if you put solar panels on some of it. So the BAR grant is up to 200,000. They actually applied only for 150. I always tell my clients, only apply for what you need plus 10 or 20%, just to cover yourself. But the problem with the BAR grant is they put about $1 million a year around out there, and the max you can apply for is 200,000. Everybody loves BAR grants. Because look at all the stuff you can do with it. And so if everybody applied for the max, there'd be very few BAR grants issued if you just do simple math. So it's 200,000 for all those types of things. I find that the BAR grant is an excellent tool. If you have a controversial site or even a site where you really just don't know what you want to do, the next thing you might think about after a BAR grant would be an assessment grant. Those are also up to 200,000. You can do a phase 1, 2, 3. Cost estimate. You can even do a remedial action plan. 200,000 probably doesn't cover all that on a big site, but you can apply it for 200,000. But when you apply for that grant for 200,000, they also want to know about the future thinking of that. That's why I like the BAR grant as the first step, because they want to know if you go forward after the assessment grant, will this become a project? This is not like just kicking the tires for DECD. So if you do an assessment grant for 200,000, let's say you're doing some sort of request for expression of interest from developers, and you tell them you have a letter of intent, then they might fund your assessment grant because they know the next step would be the remediation grant. Now they're investing 200,000 for a future project. They also have a hybrid. So then the next thing is the remediation grant, which is up to 6 million. That doesn't mean you have to apply for 6 million. They just raised it from 4 to 6. And they just went from 2 to 4 just a year and a half ago. So they're finding these large sites that are, need some serious work. The remediation only stuff will not trigger prevailing wage in the future project, but you do have to use prevailing wage on the actual cleanup, which it's just another administrative requirement. They also finally have a hybrid. Let's say you have a project that has some old reports, or maybe they're just a year old. You just need to do the remedial action plan, but you do need to do more than just put it out to bid. Sometimes they will fund a limited assessment and remediation. Again, I think it's up to 6 million too. So those are the basically 3 categories: BAR, assessment, but they all have to lead somewhere. That's the main advice I can give you on it. You can't just say, oh, let's just figure out what's going on there and then we'll figure out in the future. That's probably not going to get funded. So you need some strategic thinking on that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Chris, you had your hand up earlier. I don't know if you still have a question?
Just, Dale, nice to see you. That was a great presentation and thank you. I just wanted to respond to Jeff's question about the brownfields list. I think Jeff asked that question. I've been in touch with Randy from TAB, as a matter of fact, yesterday as of late, and I've been discussing with her a brownfields list for Middlesex County. So I started working on that with her, and I hope to figure out soon if we're gonna move forward with it. So I'll let you know. I'll keep you up to date, Susie.
Thank you.
Sure.
Isn't, so. Whether or not something's brownfield, that's probably gonna be private information and not necessarily public.
Which is why it's hard to have a
Yeah,
complete
I'm gonna
list.
say, so it's not like you could really set an objective to have an exhaustive list.
Mhm.
You could try, but you can't, there isn't a method to say, I'm gonna do this and it'll be exhaustive.
Yeah, Deep's list is basically the official one, but it's hard.
Yeah,
to
but
go
if some
through.
farmer knows they
Oh, right.
spilled fertilizer in 1956 and it's been sitting there, that's
Yeah,
that's only knowledge in that family.
yeah,
The same thing with small factories and whatnot, it's just individual knowledge, it's not, there's no place where it's.
towns have knowledge they don't disclose.
Yeah,
they
so
might-
how,
The town might not have.
right, so base this list then, it's sort of reasonable suspicion, not really probable cause.
Right.
You don't have probable cause till you do the 1, 2, and 3 assessment, but you have reasonable suspicion that this piece of property might be a brownfield, and you put it on the list anyway?
Well, yeah, I think that this is why I said, in addition to what TAB does and looking at the state site, which gives you a rudimentary, list, because they only put stuff on the site that they're aware of and somebody's filed some paperwork on that they don't know by osmosis. But that's why I say talk to your town engineers, your elder statesmen of your town who've been out on the road and may know of that farm. You're exactly right, sir, that you just, there's so much that you don't know, especially in rural areas where they were afraid to tell you about things, but I think that's going to change over the next year. When you talk to TAB, that might be something to talk to them about, how you update in real time once the Transfer Act goes away, because you will see some of that farmland. You will see that old shed that's 12,000 square feet that's like falling down, that has an oil tank under it. You will see things like that pop up once it's safe.
Still probable cause, right? I mean, reasonable suspicion, you don't know.
I hate to ask, but are you talking about the
Other-
Bates factory?
Other questions?
I hate to ask, but are you talking about the Bates
Are
factory
there any
That
other
could be
questions
one,
online?
hypothetically,
Yeah,
or St. John's or the Orco
or
building?
hypothetically. Okay,
I know all those.
there's others. Any other
Uh,
questions in the room or online? It looks like none.
uh,
So thank you very much, Dale. Really appreciate the information. I'm sure we'll have some follow-up with you in not too long.
All right,
Thank
I'm
you.
happy to come back and actually meet you live. How about that?
Great, yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, you have a good one now.
You too.
I once tried to put a British manufacturer
So we're
into
gonna
the piano
wrap up the
factory
meeting.
in Iverson, 50,000 square feet.
So that's another one. So do we need
It
to,
was awful. I've been through all of it.
excuse me, we're going to,
We just had
Do you
one
have
other thing
more
on the
business?
agenda, which is
Okay.
our other item. I don't know if anybody has anything good to, or for the good of the order to talk about, I should say,
good or bad?
good or bad.
I'll put a quick
Well,
plug in while I'm online. Hi, everyone. This is Ben Lovejoy, Project Manager for the Department of Housing. I manage the Municipal Affordable Housing Technical Assistance Program. And I just want to encourage any municipality that might be looking. I heard the representative sort of talking about this hypothetical situation. If there are municipalities out there that have hypothetical projects or know that they want to do things around housing, and want to kind of get a good pathway of how they may need to address those sorts of things. There, we open what's called the Developers Engagement Program twice a year. There's a fall and a spring submission where municipalities, developers, partnerships, whatever it might be, can submit a pretty short application that says kind of describes what they're trying to do and where they're trying to do it. And based on those applications, we guarantee a meeting with every applicant within, I believe it's 10 or 15 business days of receiving it, to discuss next steps, whether it be brownfield grants, if that's what's needed to be explored, or if it's infrastructure investment, like what was mentioned, if that's required. It sort of helps lay out where you're going to go. So I will put a little plug in that if any of the municipalities on this call are interested in that sort of thing, feel free to contact Megan or contact me directly. And additionally, if any municipalities are interested in pursuing projects related to housing development in areas, whether it be, brownfield or older areas, like feel free to also reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat. I've been tasked by the commissioner to function sort of as a liaison for all these municipalities, and try to help out when there are like what the representative said, when there are questions. What do we do next? What do we do first? What do we even do before we even think about what we're going to do? I've had multiple meetings with towns to just go over, what programs might be available and just to sort of steer them. I'm not limited to sort of discussing only Department of Housing programs we meet. So if anyone out there is looking for help with this stuff and you're, work with the town, feel free to reach out to me.
And I'm also going to add that Rivercog is going to be applying for an EPA grant. We haven't yet determined whether it's an assessment grant or a coalition assessment grant. We are looking for towns to let us know if they have a brownfield property in the town that they do not own, that the town did not contaminate. So landfills are not eligible. But if there is a property in your town and you might want to partner with us, please give me a call. Let me know. We can talk about it.
Boy, there's a lot. That's good. Especially in Chester, Deep River,
Anybody else?
Essex.
No. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Well,
So moved. Second?
yeah.
Second.
Thank you. Adjourned.
Sure.
Thank you all very much.
Your timing is
Thank
impeccable.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye. Bye.
Um,